Good afternoon to my European colleagues and to the European audience, and good morning to those of you who are joining from the States. Welcome to this session titled Strategic Recalibration, Central European Approaches to China and to the Indo-Pacific. My name is Julia Pallanch. I am Senior Program Coordinator at GMF's Indo-Pacific Program. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you guys today. The panel is organized under the umbrella of GMF's ReThink.CEE Fellowship. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the ReThink.CEE Fellowship is a program that was launched by GMF in 2018, and it addresses the next generation of leaders from the broader CEE region, including policy experts, analysts, researchers, and civic activists. And it's based on the conviction that a more resilient, democratic, and internationally engaged Central and Eastern European region is essential for the development of a prosperous and integrated Europe. Today's panel introduces the findings of ReThink.CEE fellow Zuzana Krulichová and her year-long policy project, which again is titled Strategic Recalibration, Central European Approaches to China and the Indo-Pacific. So in a context which sees the EU's approach to China having undergone a profound transformation, first from cooperation to caution, and now increasingly towards strategic competition, the debate has so far been shaped by larger EU economies, mostly Germany and France. In recent years, however, smaller EU 27 states have taken the initiative and have started using their agency to recalibrate relations with China. Lithuania and the Czech Republic stand out as they are the only two CEE countries that have published their own Indo-Pacific strategy. What motivates small EU member states with limited historical engagement with the region to formalize their Indo-Pacific strategies? How does this challenge assumption about the influence and foreign policy capacity of smaller EU states? To what extent can CEE countries shape the broader EU approach to China and the Indo-Pacific? And what are the implications of the shift for the EU's coherence, competitiveness, and geopolitical standing? To answer these questions, I'm joined today by Zuzana Krulichová, who is the author of this article, which is now live. I believe my colleague Zuzana will be posting the link to the chat. Thank you for that. She's a PhD candidate and assistant lecturer at Charles University and a research fellow at the European Institute for European Policy. Then we're also joined by Dr. Linas Didvalis. I am so sorry if I'm butchering your names. Please correct me afterwards. Who is the associate professor at Vytautas Magnus University, and we're also joined by Dr. Tamás Matura, who is an associate professor at Corvinus University of Budapest and founder of the CEE Center for Asian Studies. A couple of housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. And to make for a more interesting debate, please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box below, not in the chat. We will be gathering your questions and we'll ask them towards the end of this session. And without further ado, if you want to start, Zuzana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Julia, for the introductions, and thank you everybody for coming. I will start sharing my screen, so bear with me for a second, please. And I hope it works. Yeah, I hope everybody can see the presentation. So again, thank you very much for coming to this presentation of my paper. I'm very grateful for the ReThink.CEE Fellowship, which allowed me to do this research extensively in Czechia and Lithuania. And the paper, as was said, is titled Strategic Recalibration, Central European Approaches to China and the Indo-Pacific. The initial idea, as Julia mentioned here, was to take a more thorough look at how the smaller EU member states can have agency to in relations to China and Indo-Pacific, because for the first look, I think it's puzzling to ask why small member states such as Lithuania and Czechia would publish Indo-Pacific strategies when they have actually limited material capacities to act in different ways within the Indo-Pacific. And I looked at it in the general context of their shifting relations with China. To start, in recent years, the EU relations with China have really shifted from perceiving China as an economic opportunity, as a new market, as an investor in infrastructure in Europe or in different European economies at the member states level, and at the EU level, it shifted towards perceiving China as a challenge or security threats in many of the member states and many of the EU institutions. This was emphasized by the COVID pandemics and the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, because it really showed how the European supply chains are fragile and how they can be affected in different scenarios. This was also happening in CEE states, which initially joined the 16+1 initiative and the Belt and Road initiative, which then shifted to more of a perception of China as a security challenge, which could be seen, for example, at the Baltic states, leaving the 16+1, leaving it at the current 14+1. In this context, the Indo-Pacific framework gained prominence as a new strategic lens for Europe. Rather than treating China independently, the Indo-Pacific approach helps to situate China within the wider region, which also emphasizes India as a regional actor besides China. Of course, this is US-led concept, and Europe's adoption of it reflects the desire to stay aligned with the transatlantic partners. The EU's Indo-Pacific strategy was published in 2021 and gave the broad framework, but then also smaller member states started publishing their national strategies for increased allegiance, for example. I will talk about this more in a minute. This is the context in which Czechia and Lithuania actually stand out, because unlike most of their neighbors, they chose to formalize their approach and their shift in relations to China into the dedicated Indo-Pacific strategies, signaling that their willingness to contribute to Europe's, but also the US strategic direction in the Indo-Pacific. In Czechia, the initial China policy was very much tied to the former President Miloš Zeman, who was a big proponent of economic cooperation with China. And this very much changed with the government, the center-right government of 2021, which is still in an office for the last week. And this government really started to see China more as a risk, but also taken a pragmatic approach to changing the directions. So the government promoted de-risking China, but also signaled increasing partnership to the US, and without criticizing China on human rights issue, etc., as a whole on the government level, which will be seen then in the Lithuania approach that this is a big difference. The Czech Indo-Pacific strategy was published within the context of the Czech EU presidency of 2022, because this was preceded by the French presidency, which really emphasized the Indo-Pacific as one of its priorities. So there was this level of continuity at the EU level. Czechia took a less structured approach to the implementation of the Indo-Pacific strategy compared to Lithuania. The strategy the agenda is based at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. as well as the implementation, but there is no specific action plan for the implementation of the strategy, not that much of a follow-up plans, and the coordination between different ministries is not as pronounced. In the Lithuanian case, the shift of the China policy was much more pronounced because the government proposed a value-based foreign policy. It opened up Taiwanese representation office, left the 16+1 initiative, and announced the Indo-Pacific strategy during the NATO summit in Vilnius, which really signaled the willingness to different partners, not only the Indo-Pacific countries, but also the United States and the EU, that Lithuania is willing to really use this Indo-Pacific concept in its foreign policy. The implementation of the strategy is more structured. It has a dedicated action plan, which doesn't have a dedicated budget to it, which is one of the main problems of the implementation of the strategy, which I will also talk about a little bit further. But the approach of the Lithuanian government is much more streamlined in the way how the ministries coordinate amongst each other. If we compare both strategies, we can see that the Lithuanian strategy is much more values-driven, is more assertive in its tone on China, and it's much more structured in the implementation phase. The Czech strategy is more focused on economic cooperation, is less structurally implemented, and is built on the experienced diplomatic apparatus, but not really on new activities. It really is focused on continuity in the activities organized already at the MFA level and at the diplomatic level, but doesn't introduce that much of a new material, let's say. Both strategies have this strong element of signaling, not only to partners in the Indo-Pacific, but also in the United States and in the EU. The cooperation with the US is a very strong factor in both of those policies. The financial resources are limited for both countries, which really is tied to the small state status of those both countries, meaning there is no specific budget for any of the activities, which is the major problem really identified by most of the people I have interviewed during the research process. Also, there are limited institutional capacities. So both of the countries are small state, they have a smaller capacities in knowledge, in personnel on the level of the MFA, of the ministries of trade, etc. The question of the strategies also is, it is a short time now to really assess the implementation, but moving forward, we will see how the focus of the foreign policies will change, because in Lithuania, the government changed now in August 2025. In Czechia, it will change in a week. And in both countries, there is a shift towards populism in the governments, I would say. In Czechia, it's expected at least that the government will be backed by populist parties. We will see how it all goes in a week. But moving forward, it can be expected that the stance on China will not be as tough in both cases. We will see how this affects the Indo-Pacific reconfiguration, let's say, and the partnership built in the region. The recommendations made by the paper, there is some more recommendations you can find in the actual paper, but the major one is dedicate funding for implementation, which really is needed. It can be seen in the case of Canada, which actually have a specific budget tied to the implementation, and it was identified really by basically everybody I talked to. Now, strengthening institutional expertise, that's what I've just mentioned, that the small countries really, in some cases, they have a one person working specific desk. There is not that much knowledge on the local languages. There are limited ties within the region. So it's really important to invest in the public service. Pursuing specialization is one of the recommendations made, also tied to the small state status. Pursuing specialization in some technical domain, for example, in some economic department or regional specialization can really help the small states to streamline the resources they have in building the ties and relations in the region. At the EU level, it has been identified that it would help to formalize the coordination mechanism on Indo-Pacific or on China as well, I would say, but there are some informal groups. They meet regularly, they coordinate on the Indo-Pacific issues, but they are not formal. It is not always clear how to join, what are the outcomes of this cooperation and coordination. So making this more transparent and more formal could really help cohesiveness of the EU foreign policy on some of these agendas. Lastly, I would like to mention that it would be helpful to explore Global Gateway as a means to establish new relations in the region, because there is limited funding, as I've mentioned, for some of the activities. The small states also identified that joining Global Gateway and some of the projects would be helpful for them to establish ties where they have limited capacities to do so. But at this point, again, mentioning the small state status, but it's more difficult for small states to be included in the Global Gateway project. So they also identified this as a possible avenue for future investments or for further enhancing their capabilities in the region. So to conclude, the Indo-Pacific strategies help small states diversify economically and signal alignment with democratic partners. They allow the limited capacities to assert policy agency and influence at the EU level engagement, because they are able to join the formal and also the informal networks. The Indo-Pacific concept remains contested. It's at some point differently interpreted, but even within the states who actually publish the Indo-Pacific strategy, it is not always clear what this concept represents and how useful it is. And it provides a useful framework for them, but sometimes, even if it's seen as a useful concept, is sometimes contested from within. So defining the strategy behind the strategy could be also helpful for higher clarity of the foreign policy. So thank you. And Julia, I will give the floor to you again.
Thank you very much, Zuzana. I read the paper with lots of interest. So if you haven't read it again, it's been posted in the chat. I encourage you all to read it. I already have several questions, even though I hope I will not get to ask them. The Q&A box is there for you all to drop your questions or your notes. But I would like to go to Linas. I don't know if you're... Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
The floor is all yours. We would welcome your reactions, your thoughts. In particular, if I can abuse my my role today. Having seen your profile, I would also, after your analysis of the bilateral ties also with China, I would also welcome your thoughts about the more Indo-Pacific piece of the strategies, right? Because we often use the Indo-Pacific strategy as almost a synonym with China strategies, but you also have lots of experience with Japan and the remaining piece. So if you have a couple of minutes to elaborate on that, I would very much welcome it.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. And thank you and congratulations to Zuzana for publishing this paper. I share the same sentiment. I read the paper with great interest, and it's good from Lithuania's point of view to get such attention. And maybe that's one of the most visible effects of this Indo-Pacific strategy so far, that Lithuania is getting quite a bit of attention from researchers, first and foremost, because it's not the first event when I'm talking about Lithuania's Indo-Pacific strategy. But of course, the paper is getting into more kind of questions, what else we could get from this strategy as a small country, and it's raising many good points for us to ponder about, and some giving some questions for further research, I would say, because I guess Zuzana was limited in the scope of this paper and was not able, of course, to open all the boxes and all the questions. There are so many still questions that are remaining. I very much agree with the point made by Zuzana that first and foremost, it's a diplomatic signaling that is there in this strategy. That both in Czechia's side and Lithuania's side, we see the timing of these strategies are prepared, that it would get quite much attention from international partners. In Czechia's side is regarding EU, position that it's taking, and Lithuania side, there was a Vilnius summit of NATO that it was taking place. So, and Lithuania was actually quite much rushing to some degree to make the strategy ready during the NATO summit, that it could be distributed and could be talked about. I'm also very much thankful that Zuzana is also mentioning recommendations in the paper. That's, of course, always good for us to rethink from the practical point of view what could be improved. And I hope our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is reading that and taking some notes about it. I'm also happy that interviews are part of the sources on which this paper was based. And that, of course, raises the credibility and importance of this paper, that it's based on talks and discussions with decision makers in both countries. Of course, if I have to be a little bit picky in this role that I'm taking here right now, then I would have, of course, some wishes that this paper would fulfill even furthermore. Maybe getting even a bit more into domestic politics. Of course, the limitations are there, but it would be very interesting to see a little bit of these domestic games that were played in both countries that were leading to these strategies being made. Of course, maybe some things Zuzana knows very well, but maybe the limited pages amount was forcing her to reduce this part of the information. I was also a little bit of missing some of the maybe timelines or some kind of like a lists of things or events that would be marking the journey that both countries are taking towards this these strategies. Because in Lithuania's case, I know very well that there is a prehistory in a sense of the perceptions of China as a somewhat suspicious, somewhat threatening, that predates this strategy quite a bit, a few years before, and that is setting the background story that maybe allows to better understand what was happening in Lithuania at that time, that led to this kind of strategy. And also, when reading, I was also was wishing to see maybe a little bit more of qualitative data in the paper, maybe some maps or maybe some graphs or this kind of information that would also extend some of the words, some of the phrases that we see in this paper, mentioning that, well, the trade is maybe not that really extensive between Lithuania and Indo-Pacific countries, or maybe the countries that I included in this Indo-Pacific strategy as a certain amount, certain number, but seeing that on the maps or maybe seeing some graphs that show the trade would, I think, extended the enriched this paper quite a bit. But all this said, of course, I can wish so many things, but Zuzana still delivered, I think, very good results, good overview for those who want to understand what's happening with these strategies in both countries. I think it's a very good, valuable starting point, and I will include this paper without much doubt as a reading to, well, practitioners and both researchers and students that I'm teaching about these topics. So thank you for the results. And this is my short take at the beginning. And Julia, maybe, yes, we can come back to some of those aspects of Lithuania, bilateral maybe affairs with some Indo-Pacific countries. I could expand on that a little bit later.
Thank you very much, Linas. We already have a question for you in the Q&A box, but we will get back to it later. Zuzana, I will also allow you the floor after Tamás will have had also an opportunity to give his input, and then we will be having your reactions to them. Tamás, the floor is all yours.
All right, thanks for having me too today. It was my pleasure to read your paper. If I may add something, because, you know, I'm not from the Baltics, I'm not from the Czech Republic, I'm sitting in Budapest. So what I can contribute to the discussion today is another perspective why a country, in this case Hungary, does not have an Indo-Pacific strategy, or a China strategy for that matter. Because I think that while your paper was great, maybe in the future you could expand it. I know that it was probably not in the focus of your current research, but in the future, in your future research, it might be interesting to also include countries as a contrast that do not have an Indo-Pacific strategy, like Hungary. Actually, you know, maybe because I'm Hungarian, but I think Hungary is one of the best examples you might include in the future, simply because of the very special nature of Hungarian-Chinese relationships. And I also agree with one of your major takeaways that probably this symbolic signaling is one of the most important features of the two relevant countries in the Pacific strategies, because let's face the fact, none of these countries in Central Europe have the will and the ability to do too much about the Indo-Pacific. As you yourself pointed out, our relationship to China was already very limited. So it's really hard to imagine that these small Central European countries with their very limited resources could build a really substantial and meaningful relationship to many countries of the Indo-Pacific region. But this symbolic part is definitely important, and I think it was an important turn in the case of the two Central European countries. Meanwhile, in a sharp contrast, the Hungarian government seemingly is at odds with any kind of strategy. So I think it's one of the earmarks of the past 15 years under Viktor Orban in Hungary that strategies are barely written, or actually I can't even recall any strategy in Hungary, I mean in a written format. There are some political movements that are called strategies, but in reality they are not in the classical sense and classical definition of a strategy. One of the reasons we don't have strategies here is that if a government writes and publishes a strategy, that government could be held accountable to that strategy. So you can read it, you can review it even years later, and if the strategy was not implemented, which is a very real threat, as you yourself pointed out in the case of the other two countries, then it could lead to political ramifications. So I think that one of the main reasons the Hungarian government does not have any kind of strategies, including a China strategy or Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific strategy, is that fact. The other thing is that the Hungarian government has been always very vocal about its interest-based foreign policy. Like 10 years ago, the Hungarian prime minister even made a speech in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he actually presented a false dichotomy when he said that value-based foreign policy is for the dummies and interest-based foreign policy is our real road or path away or ahead. Now, of course, it's a false dichotomy. I think everyone understands, and it's very clear that for small and weak countries like all of us in Central and Eastern Europe, a value-based international relations and international order is in our interest. So this is not something that either or, but it's an and that we need both of that. Still, the Hungarian government in the past couple of years has been very much focusing on economic relations with China. I think for more than a decade, it was more like daydreaming, and the results were far from being very, very lucrative or good. Meanwhile, political relations have been always very strong, and I think this is part of this balancing game, what Mr. Orban believes that he can pull off vis-a-vis the EU, America, Russia, and China at the same time. And I think an Indo-Pacific strategy would not fit into this framework for the very simple fact that, as you yourself mentioned before, publishing or even talking about an Indo-Pacific strategy is a kind of an attachment or means an attachment to the United States, Japan, and so on and so forth. And probably it would have not been taken very well by the Chinese side. And therefore, just to move on to your recommendations and conclusions, therefore, while I would love to see higher levels of Visegrad 4 cooperations, or at least coordination in this matter, I think as long as the Hungarian government pursues this present foreign policy, the prospect of such a coordination is very limited. Actually, we've been there. So last decade, there were a lot of coordinations and meetings between Central European, including Visegrad 4 heads of Asia departments. But as far as I know, these meetings were not really fruitful, and I'm not sure that they are still going on. At least the Hungarian representative is, as far as I know, not there. So what we need to pursue a full-fledged Visegrad 4 or Central European coordination is a very different Hungarian foreign policy. Which may happen next year, we don't know. If I may have a couple of more minutes to talk about the potential foreign policy of a potential next government in case Fidesz lost its power in 2025, 2026, then what I do expect is a less political relationship to China, maybe the same level of economic relationship to China, but certainly the first and foremost important priority of the next Hungarian government should be regaining access to EU funds. And that kind of goal or priority will definitely have a lot of ramifications, not only vis-a-vis our China relations, but also regarding our, but the government's close relationship to Russia. So, but if that change happens next year in Hungary, another recommendation could be what I know that Central European countries, Visegrad 4 countries have trialed with is, for example, joint embassies, or at least some kind of joint representative offices in Indo-Pacific countries, exactly because our resources are very, very limited. So I don't see all the Visegrad 4 countries opening up embassies in the less important countries of the Indo-Pacific region. But for example, joint embassies, which I don't think we have very good experiences with in the past, but maybe in the future that could be a next step, and that could pretty much help to use our resources in a meaningful way. So thank you very much once again for your paper, and I really hope that you will continue your job doing research on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Zuzana, you have 5 minutes to react to the comments on your paper. Afterwards, I would very much like to steer the conversation back on a more policy-oriented angle. I think we have lots of input already to build on, but again, the Q&A box is right there. Please don't be shy, ask your questions. Zuzana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you also both of you for your comments. So maybe first I will start with Tamás. I completely agree that the research should be accompanied by other countries that didn't publish the strategy to really show the full picture and the full intricacies of the decisions, the impacts, etc. So thank you for talking more about the Hungarian case, because I think that one is a really interesting one, but I think it's difficult, honestly, to compare it to any other because it's very, very exceptional. But I think looking into it more, or even looking more into like Estonia and Latvia and the differences in the decision making in foreign policy could really be interesting for the future. So yeah, 100% agree. And otherwise, Linus, I think domestic policy is really also very important in this case. As you both mentioned, it was impossible to go into more detail on any of these, but I think maybe we could also come back to it and talk about it, because I think the first question is about the future. In the Q&A box is about the future relations of Lithuania with China. I think in Hungary, if the government changes, it will also go in a slightly different direction. In the Czech case, definitely I can see it going more pragmatic on China after the election. So I think the domestic policies are vital for formulating the stance on China for sure. But I would say that based on the research I made, the Indo-Pacific strategy, the China policy, of course, is a bit of a different thing, but the Indo-Pacific strategies are very much tied to the MFA and to the specific people that wrote them and established them. So I think in Lithuania and also in the Czech case, but maybe to a lesser extent, this was really tied to specific people really being persuaded that this is the way to go. So I think there was also this element of the key personnel, let's say, making this decision. So yeah, Julia, I think maybe we can go straight to the discussion, because I think we will go back more to the policy angle than to the paper feedback.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this. Actually, building on what you were just discussing, I was wondering, you just said that the Indo-Pacific strategies have been very much built on the expertise sometimes of specific people within the MFAs. I am just wondering whether there has been some sort of integrated system as well with other EU countries, whether there have been consultations to draft these policies, and to what extent there was consultation, because we've discussed the contributions of this, or we've touched on the contributions of this Indo-Pacific policies to the broader EU Indo-Pacific strategy, but I'm also wondering what each of these countries took away from the experience of other countries which already have a strategy. I don't know if this came up during your conversations.
Yes, so both countries consulted the content of the strategies with other partners. Both mentioned Brussels in general, but let's say like the institutions, because there is the strategy created by the Commission. In Lithuania, they mentioned the Czech Republic as a source of consultation. Both mentioned Canada and the United States. So in both cases, the US was included in directly in talks about the content. In the Czech case, France was also mentioned as a source of information and some sort of alignment of goals, mainly because of the EU, the Czech presidency of the Council. So yes, there was consultations with different partners, also with the Indo-Pacific partners, of course, but actually this was mentioned to a lesser extent. So the content was more based on the alignment with the partners, with the Euro-Atlantic partners, than specific goals in the region. And also you mentioned coordination within the EU. So after publishing the strategies, there is some sort of informal groupings of countries with Indo-Pacific strategies, but also with Indo-Pacific interests. And they coordinate the policies independently or on if they have the strategy or not. And it's some sort of informal grouping, let's say, which I mentioned in the presentation, that it's one of the findings is maybe making this thing more clear to everybody.
Thank you very much. Again, I have lots of questions, but I do not want to monopolize the conversation. One other question that I would ask, which goes back a little bit to what I was asking before, is that in the paper, you haven't necessarily you start from the fact that both the Czech Republic and Lithuania have an Indo-Pacific strategy. So you have kind of bypassed what led to having an Indo-Pacific strategy, right? Both countries have been at the receiving end of China's wrath, for lack of a more descriptive word. So I'm just wondering, how large was the China component in the decision of pursuing an Indo-Pacific strategy, and how do you balance the opportunities of deeper engagement with democratic partners like Japan, India, and Australia with the risk of antagonizing China? Of course, Taiwan is also a big piece of this conversation, but I'm just wondering if you've given some thought to this.
Yeah, so the China element was, I think it was different in both countries. In Lithuanian case, there was, when I was doing the interviews, it was kind of clear that it was the Indo-Pacific strategy was seen as a continuation of the China policy before. So the steps like opening the Taiwanese office in Vilnius, or the decision to leave the 16+1, this was kind of seen as a continuity. And so the China element I saw as really important for the Indo-Pacific strategy. In the Czech case, this was a little bit less so, because China strategy was also prepared. So these are different documents. There is no public China strategy at this moment. But it was being prepared as an internal guideline at the MFA. So the internal, so the China element in the Pacific strategy was a little bit decreased by this like simultaneous process, I would say. And Taiwan plays a big role in both of those strategies. But again, I think in the Lithuanian strategy a bit more, because the strategy is based on the values-based foreign policy. So this is very clearly tied, to the idea of somewhat protecting Taiwan, which is also why the Lithuanian strategy is more, let's say, tough on China. I hope this answers your question, but I'm not sure.
No, it does. It does. Thank you. Thank you very much. I was actually wondering what came first. So it definitely does. Perhaps, and this is in general. Either of you could pick up this question. I'm just wondering how much of these strategies are driven by geopolitical tensions, and how much of it of the strategies is driven by the opportunity to build more resilient supply chains, diversifying partnerships, and questions of security, including economic. So perhaps, Linas, if we could go back a little bit to what we were discussing, I would be interested in the broader Indo-Pacific component of the strategies. I would also be interested, if I can ask, on the interest of smaller Indo-Pacific countries to pursue bilateral ties with relatively small countries on the other side of the world, rather than going through larger formats.
Thank you for the question. overall, I think that strategy is not really changing that much when it comes to business relationships and trade, because business people, usually investors, they do not look very much into these kind of strategies from my experience and from what I've been talking with others. So I keep coming back to what Zuzana said very much, that it's diplomatic signaling, that it's more to bring your allies closer to you, or hope to bring your allies closer to you. As like-minded countries, you are signaling that kind of position. But when it comes to reaching out to all these 40 or 30 something countries in Indo-Pacific, you cannot go with a strategy there and hope that that will energize everyone to bring investment and to start trading with you and so on. So basing from this very general kind of standpoint, it's a long and hard work to establish trade relationship and investment relationship and so on. And there has to be very many multiple players and multiple interests going forward with that, rather than just Ministry of Foreign Affairs creating a strategy and telling that, yes, we have this document. And as Zuzana is very much mentioning that in the paper a few times, it takes time to actually see the results in practice in terms of numbers of how much there is trading and how much there is investment. And also there is the skepticism always, what if there was no strategy as such? Would we see similar numbers or not? And this is a very big question, because correlation does not imply causation. So we always could be questioning how much is that strategy contributing to some of the practical changes. But coming back to this diplomatic signaling, I think this is a good tool and useful tool to have strategy like this, because it's a conversation starter with diplomats, with foreign delegations. And this is a friendly conversation starter. When you say that you have this kind of document, you show interest, you show your dedication that you want to expand your relationships in that region. And then it depends, of course, on diplomats and bureaucrats and all kind of staff on Ministry of Foreign Affairs and diplomatic missions to use this document in an efficient way. But again, it takes time, and it would be interesting actually to see interviews done with, let's say, diplomats and other staff, and ask how much you use this strategy in practice, how much is it useful for you. Staying a little bit away maybe from the strategy and telling a bit more general information, as paper says, Lithuania is disappointed in results that China promised but did not deliver in terms of investment, especially. China tried to propose investment in strategic objects in Lithuania, and Lithuania refused that, saying, no, it's sensitive. So there was a Klaipėda seaport and other areas where China was curious to invest. At the same time, China did not invest in other areas that would be less sensitive and that would create this good starting point for closer economic relations. So Lithuania is disappointed with that. And of course, Lithuania is curious to diversify in this light its economic relationships, and to build connections with as many countries as possible in Indo-Pacific, because that means resilience, economic resilience for Lithuania. Lithuania took some practical steps that also are mentioned in the paper, establishing new embassies, for example, in the region. And these embassies are working quite hard in the economic sector. Again, I don't know how much they're using this strategy as a helping tool, but in general, they are trying to build closer relationships economically. And Lithuania also established its office in Taiwan. So it was kind of response to Taiwanese representative office in Lithuania. And that office is also basically 100% is focused on economic ties. So there is this, of course, interest from Lithuania's side But as I said at the beginning, I'm somewhat skeptical how much the strategy can help with that. We will see. Time is, we have to wait a little bit, be patient.
Thank you very much. While I have you, I had a question on the potential of a reset in relations. Lately, all newspapers that are looking at the Lithuanian-Chinese relations are talking about efforts to reset the relation, and I think this ties nicely with the question that we've received in the chat box, in the Q&A box. So if I can read it for everybody. It was mentioned that the new government of Lithuania is planning to change China's policy. And yes, it said that the goal is to normalize diplomatic relations. Is this something that you see possible? And how could it happen? And does China have any interest in it? So if we can abuse your expertise a little bit further, Linas, we would welcome an answer to that. And just for the record, please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and also to the speakers, if there's anything you want to ask of the other speakers, please do. Tamás, I have not forgotten about you. I have questions for you as well, but let's go in order.
Yes, predictions is a tough task to make. Would it be possible for Lithuania and China to normalize diplomatic relations? The current mood is lukewarm, I would say, on both sides, because China is maybe waiting for some kind of reapproachment from Lithuania's side, maybe some promises, or maybe, well, offering some kind of, how to say it, some kind of middle ground position that would be suitable for both sides, that would signalize some kind of friendly relationship. And going back to normalization. On Lithuania's side as well, there is a new government that is almost 1 year when there is a new government in Lithuania. It has its ups and downs. There is a new kind of cabinet that is formed just recently, but the same kind of election took place a year ago, basically, in Lithuania for the parliament. And the new government during this whole year did also quite little in practice to send some kind of signal or to show that, well, we want to do something. So in practice, there is very little done. And there is even more tensions accumulating, I would say, which is not really helping to move forward. And by that, I mean that during these more or less 4 years, basically, when China downgraded its diplomatic mission in Lithuania from embassy to charge d'affaires. Since then, Lithuania is not approving new diplomats, new staff in the embassy. Well, it's not the embassy, charge d'affaires, but embassy at the same time. And this approval is a kind of like a legal puzzle, legal kind of knot that is there, because China is sending new staff and saying, we are sending new staff to the charge d'affaires office in Vilnius, please accept it. And Lithuania is responding, sorry, on our papers, there is no charge d'affaires, there's embassy, so what are you talking about? I'm dramatizing it to that kind of extent, but there is this legal dispute because the embassy was downgraded one-sidedly by China in Vilnius. And now there is a disagreement. Is there embassy or not? According to Lithuania, there is. China says, no, there is not. So, so you have this disagreement and there is no staff. And there were even some scandals when China tried to send staff from other European missions to Lithuania. But according to Lithuania's law, it's illegal without permission to staff embassy in Lithuania by staff from other missions. So Lithuania even deported some Chinese staff that was caught illegally in Lithuania. So we have these kind of very kind of somewhat tense relationship even after new government came into power. And all this is not really sending me any signals to be hopeful that something could change very rapidly. Of course, now we have a new cabinet, and that new cabinet might be having different thoughts that I don't know about. But the but the Minister of Foreign Affairs did not change, stayed the same as before. So this signals some continuity in foreign affairs, including China. And also one more thing that Lithuania is quite sensitive about, which is also not giving me big hopes, which is different from Czech Republic and from other countries, is that Lithuania is looking at China-Russia partnership in a very negative way, in many ways. Pure pragmatics would say this is nothing. Let's not look at it, and let's just trade and make some business out of it. But there are many people who are not saying that political affairs should be included, and the fact that Russia is a big threat to Baltic states, and with the current ongoing aggression towards Ukraine, and the fact that China is supplying Russia with double-use equipment and components, and not only, but there is evidence that even some military equipment or components are produced in China and sent to Russia and then used to attack Ukraine. This is a very, very sensitive security topic for Lithuania. And in this whole light, relationship with China, they would receive a lot of negative and very critical opinions if someone would try to improve that and build something friendly with China. So with the Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, I think we have a very sensitive and different dynamics than before, and that will keep shaping Lithuania-China relations as well.
Super interesting. Thank you very much. I actually have a follow-up question to that. Please do not hate me, Linas. And again, do ask, feel free to ask your own questions. But we talked a lot today about value-based foreign policy. I'm actually wondering where you would draw the line. It seems that Lithuania is sticking with value-based foreign policy, but at what point do you think there would be a tipping point in which it would seek more pragmatism, if it's not too much of a complicated question? Because I've been wondering for a couple of years now, and I'm amazed by the Lithuanian example. I think it's a fantastic example for all the other EU 27 to follow. I also believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that both Lithuania and the Czech Republic have are slightly less exposed to Chinese retaliatory measures than, let's say, Germany and France. But I would welcome your thoughts on this for sure.
Yes, complicated question in a sense. But I could maybe start with some skepticism again to make some groundwork of my answer. And I'm not too sure that this value-based foreign policy in Lithuania is how to say 100% applied in practice. That it's not used selectively. Because indeed, in some cases, it is very much stressed. In other cases, it is somewhat kind of silenced and somewhat forgotten. So Lithuania, for example, opened its embassy and started building a closer relationship with Singapore. Is Singapore very high in democracy index rankings? Not very high. So question marks about that. Lithuania sent delegations to establish closer relationship with Vietnam. Is Vietnam very high with human rights and democracy indexes? Again, not very high. So we have these kind of cases that put some doubts how much is this value-based foreign policy is consistent. And because of that, I think, again, it's some kind of diplomatic signaling. It's not very much kind of practical policy that is used on the daily basis in all decision-making in Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's a nice standpoint, nice kind of slogan, maybe in a sense, to tell when it's very convenient. It attracts attention, and then I agree, it maybe puts Lithuania in a good light, earns some soft power points. And of course, it's nice that Lithuania takes a stand when it comes to some cases, supports Taiwan and supports other values. So this is must be appreciated. But of course, for Lithuania as a small country, it's difficult to use it consistently in all cases, and maybe it would be even impossible to demand that kind of thing. So based on that, well, where to draw the line is it's an interesting question, and I think it depends on many things, like where are your allies? Because for small countries, it's very important to be close to the allies. You cannot be very well, different and very kind of separated from others for the sake of survival and security. And Lithuania, I think, is looking at this value-based foreign policy in this very flexible way to gain benefits from its allies and supporters, and then forget about it a little bit when it comes to some other relationships, and to see what happens if we can establish relationships with some countries that maybe not fitting these kind of list of values that we have just mentioned. And in China's case, of course, the very pragmatic and helpful kind of explanation would be that there is not that much in terms of investment and other kind of ties between China and Lithuania. So for Lithuania, it was relatively easy to make this position, to make this statement. And it also received, well, and Lithuania received some, you could say, benefits from that, because it aligned with allies a little bit more than before. Again, only time will show if that was beneficial or not, because we see that allies also changed their mind, and Lithuania maybe tried to appeal to some administrations, but now new administrations on the other side of Atlantic, maybe they have rethinking, and Lithuania feels that, well, it's misunderstood in certain way. So things are complicated in real world.
Well, thank you very much. It sounds like Lithuania has found some lines already, and is using a more pragmatic approach, perhaps not in the case of China, but more generally. And on this line, I would like to return to Hungary, because we were discussing earlier the fact that Budapest has been implementing perhaps one of the most pragmatic approaches with China. I was actually particularly interested in how the Sino-Hungarian relation might be affecting relations with the Trump administration. I was recently reading this piece from the South China Morning Post, in which it was outlining how the China question is actually a red line for Budapest, and how, even though Viktor Orban would be perhaps one of the closest leaders to the MAGA movement, that's definitely something that they do not see eye to eye. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that relationship, it would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, I do get this question all the time nowadays, actually for the past couple of months or even half a year. The way I'd like to kind of describe it in a nutshell is very simple. According to some of my friends who still speak to the Prime Minister, in early January, the Prime Minister kind of admitted that the election of Donald Trump was a huge political opportunity for him and a huge economic headache at the same time. Now, I don't know whether in the past 8 or 9 months he has changed his mind, because I'm not sure that, even politically speaking, Donald Trump is a huge opportunity to Mr. Orban, especially given Mr. Trump's recent comments on Hungary still purchasing Russian oil. But nevertheless, what really matters is that even before the elections in the United States last year, there had been some reports according to which the Hungarian government was preparing itself for a deal that would have been about China and would have been about striking a deal with the Trump administration, according to which Hungary could have maintained its close relationship to the People's Republic in exchange of something given or paid or whatever to the United States. Now, so far, I think our China policy is not that much affected or hasn't been affected that much by the Trump administration, but the pressure is increasing, is definitely increasing. So for the sake of those who have been following Hungarian foreign policy and US-China relations, US-Hungary relations, probably you're aware that during the Biden administration, the previous American ambassador to Budapest, Mr. David Pressman, was an adamant critique of the Hungarian government. But besides of some really funny and amusing kind of scandals connected to his activity in Hungary, nothing has really happened, and nothing really happened in terms of Hungarian-American relationship. Now, as of today, we don't have an ambassador yet. The charge d'affaires is a way more amicable to the Hungarian government. So at least on the surface and in verbal terms, the Hungarian-American relationship is experiencing new highs. But in reality, behind the curtains, I hear about a lot of tensions. I hear about a lot of American demands to Budapest. And I also hear about that the Hungarian government so far hasn't really delivered anything what the Americans were really looking for. There are some examples where the Hungarian government eventually decided to buy Chinese of something that could have been American or produced in America. And even low-hanging cherries were not picked by the Hungarian government. So I think that Mr. Trump, or at least the State Department, is getting more and more upset with the Hungarian side, which is not surprising because I think anyone who had even the most simple understanding of foreign policy and of global affairs nowadays could have known that balancing between China and the United States, well, it's a very, very short-term endeavor. So I don't think that it's sustainable. I don't think that it's doable. And in the case of Hungary, I'm especially pissed, to say the least, because those who are aware of Hungary's history in the past 100 years might be aware that the Hungarian governments in the past have tried before to play this balancing game and tried before to outsmart major empires, and somehow we always ended up on the loser side. So I hope that there is still some willingness in the government to reconsider and to understand that for small and weak countries like Hungary, as I mentioned that before today, the current liberal world order is the minimum standard. That's something we need to maintain, we need to support, we need to sustain. And playing, the smart ass between America, China, Russia, Turkey, and the EU, well, we're going to end up in a pitfall. Thank you.
Well, this was enlightening. Thank you very much. Perhaps one last question for me on this regard, coming back on this side of the Atlantic, is how do you feel that the Sino-Hungarian partnership is affecting EU cohesion in general and on the Indo-Pacific strategy most specifically?
I have never heard the Hungarian government saying anything about the Indo-Pacific strategy per se, but when it comes to EU-China relations in the past, 5-6 years, there have been multiple occasions when the Hungarian government exercised its veto power, either directly or indirectly, and blocked numerous EU actions against China. Now, I think it would be very hard to assess the real significance of these vetoes, simply because many of these would have been symbolic in nature anyway. So, when the EU tried to condemn China for its action in Hong Kong or Xinjiang, and the Hungarian government vetoed that, I'm not saying that that such a condemnation would have been totally irrelevant, but it's more symbolic than it first meets the eye. So the Hungarian government has had some impact on that. And we also know that sometimes EU member states that do not want to show up as pro-Chinese tend to use the Hungarian government as a frontman to present their views. We heard about German kind of actors that were pretty much against the EU introducing its tariffs against Chinese electric cars. They were very happy about that. Hungary was also not supportive of this idea. So diplomacy is quite complicated, and Hungary sometimes plays the scapegoat and the black sheep. Sometimes it is a scapegoat, and sometimes it is a black sheep, that's for sure. But nevertheless, as I mentioned before, if there is another Hungarian government coming in power next year, I think this situation will dissipate. And to a certain extent, to be frank, it has already dissipated a bit, because when I talked to American diplomats in the State Department, I was told that they keep an eye on the number of tweets and Facebook posts by the Hungarian Prime Minister, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and some other players, what they post about China, how many times they post about China. And according to the State Department, the number of Hungarian high-ranking officials posting about China has been decreasing since last November. So at least rhetorically speaking, the Hungarian government has decreased its exposure to China. But you are right, as you started your question, let me circle back to that. There have been some occasions when very high-ranking officials explicitly said that our relationship to China mean a red line, and even the United States shall not cross that red line. So all in all, I see a mixed signaling from the Hungarian side to the United States, and that is probably because the Hungarian government doesn't really know how to handle the situation. This is very unexpected. And you know, I don't want to kind of save the Hungarian government from public humiliation, but just to be fair, we also have to mention that it's not easy to handle the foreign policy of Donald Trump. So we talk about strategies today. Well, if there is anyone in the audience who can forge a foreign policy strategy that can survive next Monday vis-a-vis the United States, then please educate me about that. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been great. If there
Can I
are,
just have a short reaction to that?
please,
Sorry.
please.
So you asked about the EU cohesion, and I just wanted to add, first of all, that I agree with Tamás that Hungary often takes the scapegoat of the EU-China policies, because I think maybe that's not universal, and that's the CE or the Czech case, but I think we tend to focus on Hungary as this pro-Chinese actor, or if you read about CEE relations with China, there is a much focus on how the Belt and Road is detrimental to the EU cohesion, but we don't really discuss that much in Chinese investments elsewhere in the Western Europe, like in the Netherlands or somewhere. So I just wanted to add that. And also on the front of the Indo-Pacific strategies, it's actually interesting that having the EU Indo-Pacific strategy doesn't forge cohesion of the EU, though it may seem so, because there is research showing that different EU member states see the purpose of the strategy differently. So some member states or some policy practitioners in some member states would tell you that it's showing like EU autonomous foreign policy and the pursuing of strategic autonomy, and other would tell you totally different things, like it is forging the Euro-Atlantic alignment, and see completely different purposes of it. So it's just an interesting trend, I would say, that even though it may seem cohesive because there is a common strategy, it doesn't have to be so.
Super helpful. And we definitely focused on 3 very specific examples today. There's still much more to be said about other CEE countries. I mean, Slovakia would be an example, partnered with Hungary perhaps, but it's not the last one. Does anybody want to react? Linas, Tamás? to what has been said. If not, I would give you back a few minutes from your very busy days. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank my wonderful colleague, Zuzana for inviting me to do this. And I would leave the floor again to Zuzana Krulichová for your last remarks. Again, if you haven't read the paper, it's live. Please make sure you read it. It's a very interesting read. Thank you.
So thank you, Julia, for concluding this workshop, and thank you everybody for attending this talk and reading the paper. It was really, I would again like to appreciate the ReThink.CEE Fellowship that allowed me to pursue this kind of research, which otherwise would be very difficult or impossible. So thank you for this opportunity, and Julia, the floor is yours if you still want to conclude.
No, thank you very much, and thank you also to Linas and Tamás for your remarks. It's been very, very interesting, and hope to cross paths again. If you have any question to the speakers, please reach out to us and we will make sure to put you in contact. Thank you.